Hello and welcome to Monocle on Culture. I'm Robert Bounds. On today's show, we are dimming the lights and drawing back the red velvet curtain to rapturous applause as we explore the best and brightest theatre gracing our stages in 2025. Among the highlights, we'll be telling you all about a brand new production of a West End classic, a play about the experiences of the Windrush generation, and a critically acclaimed performance by an Olivier award-winning actress. And joining me today to bring you the very best of that theatre this year is the co-host of the London Theatre Review podcast, Nancy Durrant, and theatre critic at the International New York Times, Matt Wolf. Welcome both to the programme.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Suitably winterily attired. Matt's sporting a big white polo neck.
Yes.
Good stuff.
Yeah, I can barely be seen in my mouth.
And Nancy is bescarved. Nancy, we're going to start off with you and a bit of a double helping of Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Richard II and Much Ado About Nothing. Which would you like to start with?
Well, I mean, let's start with Much Ado About Nothing. Much Ado About Nothing coming to the Theatre Royal Drury Lane, Andrew Lloyd Webber's big glitzy theatre in February.
Yeah.
And it's starring Tom Hiddleston and Hayley Atwell. Both of these shows are quite starry, which is actually why I chose them and not because they were both Shakespeare, which even I didn't actually notice. It's directed by Jamie Lloyd, and I'm hoping that very much that it's going to be a bit of a return to form for him, because I absolutely loathed The Tempest, which is currently at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane with Sigourney Weaver. I felt it was all sort of Lloydisms and no ideas. You don't really want anyone messing too drastically with Much Ado, because it's such a kind of joy to watch these two just sort of bite each other into submission.
Yeah, and this is Tom Hiddleston plays Benedict, Hayley Atwell, Beatrice. It's
well,
all
I hope
about
so, unless it's the other way around, which would be kind of interesting. But
yes. and it's all about the chemistry, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think they're really well cast, actually. I mean, Hayley Atwell is kind of perfect, I think, for Beatrice, because she's just, she's funny and she can be spiky, but she's very, very sexy actress, I think. And I think that the nice thing that Tom Hiddleston has is a kind of natural vulnerability crossed with the sort of performative confidence of an old Etonian, which will play very effectively with Benedict.
That's a close line read. I like that.
It's kind of perfect for Benedict. All I want is that he turns the damn lights on and makes it kind of bright and fun, because quite a lot of Jamie Lloyd's stuff is a bit sort of dark and broody, and I'm not sure that's entirely necessary in this case.
Yes, so you mentioned that, Nancy, that it's directed by Jamie Lloyd, who's Sigourney Weaver's Tempest at the moment.
Indeed.
What are Lloydisms? You mentioned the darkness.
Well, yeah,
is
the
that
darkness.
Metaphorical as well as literal?
Well, yes, a bit. He sort of does like to sort of excavate the grimness of things a bit. And there is a certain amount of grimness in Much Ado, actually, especially with Hero, her storyline, which is really, like, she gets a really raw deal. And I'm looking forward to finding out who's playing Hero, because she can actually be a really good role, even though it's a little underwritten. You can do quite a lot with a very subtle actress. So I think that will be really great. But yeah, he does have a tendency to just sort of make it all about atmosphere and sometimes slightly overdo that. So I feel like that is just, like, you don't need to try too hard with the atmosphere of Much Ado.
No, it's jolly japes, for the most part.
Mostly jolly japes, it's true.
So that's Much Ado About Nothing at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane. That's starting on the 10th of February. And talking of classic bounce, Richard II. Maybe this is going to be played for laughs. We're going to excavate the beautiful, the classic one-liners.
So this is Coming Up at the Bridge, directed by Nicholas Heitner and Jonathan Bailey. Will star as the king who comes to a sticky end, spoiler alert. And, it's very much built around its star, of course. He's riding high on the kind of Bridgerton/Wicked wave. So it'll do really well, I know that. I haven't seen this play in quite a while. I sort of thought it was the last time I'd seen it was at the Globe with Charles Edwards, who was great. But actually, I now remember, I was on the way here, and I remember that it was Simon Russell Beale at the Almeida in 2019. The thing about it is that I remember their performances, the individual performances, and I remember the staging, and I don't remember anything else about it. This is not an ensemble piece. I don't know what you think, Matt, but it's really very much about Richard II himself and that actor. But the young actor playing Bolingbroke, Royce Pearson, is also actually quite well known. He was in Line of Duty. He's in The Witcher, apparently. Not a thing I actually watch, but lots of people do. And I'm kind of interested to see what Nick Heitner's going to do with it. Those two roles, Bolingbroke and Richard II, are quite sort of translatable to the modern age, I think. Richard is a sort of deluded autocrat who believes himself to be divinely sanctioned. I think we can all recognise that. And Henry Bolingbroke is a kind of pragmatist who can kind of draw support because he's got leadership and authority. But there are suggestions too in the text about Richard's homosexuality, which isn't really actually a concept in Shakespeare's time. Like that whole Platonic idea of affection and love between men is quite prevalent, but homosexual sex would have been a crime. But I'm just kind of interested to see how much or not that is going to get drawn out. I'm really excited about it. I think it'll be interesting. And Jonathan Bailey is always a joy to watch in pretty much everything he does.
Great. There's a lot in Richard II. Let us sit upon the ground and tell stories of the death of kings.
Indeed.
Spoiler alert. Thanks, Nancy. And that is on at...
The Bridge.
The Bridge, from the 10th of February as well.
Indeed.
Matt, and you're giving us a double helping of, for you, Sophocles as well.
Yeah,
That's how you're kicking things off.
Yeah.
Where are you going to start?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because you sort of expect lots of Shakespeare in London. I mean, that's one of the reasons to go to the theatre in this capital. But you don't necessarily expect Sophocles, well, really 3 times over, because we just had the end of a triumphant production by Rob Icke at Wyndham's Theatre of Oedipus, with an incredible performance from Leslie Manville and Mark Strong, and that was pretty dazzling. But no sooner has that one been whisked away than there's another one, production of the same play, but it'll be very, very different, coming to the Old Vic with Rami Malek and Indira Varma. And, of course, Rami Malek, an Oscar winner for Bohemian Rhapsody, will be opening more or less cheek by jowl with a production of Electra, another Sophocles play, starring another Oscar winner, new to the London stage, Brie Larson in the title role. So there seems to be this kind of traffic from the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, or wherever it is in Hollywood these days, directly to the London stage. I don't know, is there something in the goodies bag at the Oscars these days? You know, you get a trip to the West End. So it's very interesting. The Oedipus in this production looks as if it's going to be a lot more dance-driven, movement-driven at least, because it's co-directed by Matthew Warchus and the Anglo-Israeli choreographer Hafiz Schechter, who has his own dance company. And so he is working with Matthew Warchus, I gather, on making movement part and parcel of the production. And in the Mark Strong, Leslie Manville production, that wasn't part of it at all. It was very much straight-up text, and there was movement in it, but it was no way a dance piece. So this should have a very different influence. How Rami Malek and Indira Varma are going to be absorbed within that, because neither of them happen to be dancers, I have no idea. But I think what it shows you is the elasticity of these classic texts, that they can be kind of put through the prism in infinitely many ways. As for Electra, I don't think I might have seen the play once. The opera of it is actually one of my favorite operas, but the play I don't actually know as well. I have no idea what Brie Larson is like on stage. Zero idea. I don't know if she's ever even done theatre work. I hope it's not another Sigourney Weaver scenario. However, the supporting cast of this we do know, and the supporting cast is pretty brilliant. It includes as Clytemnestra, the legendary Broadway actress Stockard Channing, who's now in her 80s, hard to believe, who lives in London. She's now an expat like me, living in London, and this should be an amazing part for her. Clytemnestra is a great role. And Orestes is being played by the wonderful American actor Patrick Vale, who was in the director Daniel Fish, who's directing this, the director Daniel Fish's revival of Oklahoma on Broadway and then in London. And Patrick Vale is sort of Daniel Fish's kind of muse in a funny way. And so it's very nice that if he's coming to do a show that isn't Oklahoma, that he's brought one of his leading actors from that with him. So I think this is just a kind of theatrical marriage made in heaven. I'm so intrigued.
Yeah. I mean, well, there's lots to unpack. I wanted to ask, having got you in the room, Matt, about the kind of what the landmark performances of Oedipus and maybe Electra have been, because we've talked about Shakespeare already on this show. We know how to deconstruct the canon, play around with different bits and bobs and all the rest of it, because it's kind of, we think of it as bulletproof or an edifice. Sophocles, I remember studying at school and it being kind of an edifice of text, amazing stories. What can be done in these? What can be done in these shows?
I think one of the advantages, perhaps, of the Sophoclean double compared to the Shakespearean one is with Richard II and certainly Much Ado, which gets done all the time, and with good reason. It's a joyous, wonderful play. But, you know, if you are Tom Hiddleston or Jonathan Bailey, you're probably aware of God knows how many productions that have come before, many of them quite recently. And aside from, obviously, Oedipus 5 minutes ago with Mark Strong, actually, there are relatively few. I mean, Ralph Fiennes did it some some while ago, Alan Howard back in the day, but that's really stretching quite a while ago. As I say, I can't remember any Electras in London, although I'm sure there have been some that I'm blocking on, and the opera version is not something that I think Brie Larson is probably going to concern herself with. So in a way, you're not going up against the kind of weight of tradition in quite the same way. You can sort of reinvent it. And also, I think, oddly, these Titan classical titles seem weirdly apposite. We're thinking a lot now about power and how power is made manifest and what it means to be a king, what it means to rule. And that's exactly, and blindness, prophecy, the connections are infinite.
There's a real advantage in the fact that they are not in English. And so you can mess about with them much more easily without people getting upset.
Well, that's extremely well put, because the thing about the Rob Icke version was that it was his own text.
Totally.
It was called Oedipus, but it really was a Rob Icke play. Now, this version is by Ella Hickson, who's a very good contemporary English writer, and what her version will be, again, I don't know. But I assume it'll be shot through with movement, so that will give it a whole different affect.
It's almost like we have two blind seers of Thebes in the studio, knowing bloody everything.
We're all Tiresias.
Yes.
Unleashing our inner Tiresias.
So that is Oedipus Rex and Electra coming to the London stage. And Oedipus is on from the 21st of January to the 29th of March. Electra runs from the 24th of January until the 12th of April. Nancy, Alterations is a wonderful, wonderful play about the sort of Windrush generation. Tell us about this. What's the history of this play?
Well, I mean, it's a comedy chronicling the Guyanese British experience in the 1970s. It's by a writer called Michael Abensets. It's a kind of classic of black theatre set in a kind of Caribbean tailor's shop. It is part of the Black Plays Archive, which is an online catalogue of the kind of first professional productions of the UK of plays written by black British African and Caribbean playwrights, which I think is hosted by the National Theatre. And it feels right at the moment that these Windrush generation stories are kind of coming back to the stage right now. It follows on the heels of Love a Man on the BBC, and I think there's a big market for and a big interest in these stories. So this one is directed by Lynette Linton. It's starring Arinze Kene, who people will probably remember for Get Up, Stand Up. He played Bob Marley in that, and this is not that show, and this is not that role, but he is a fantastic actor and also a fantastic writer, actually, so he knows what to do with the text. And the actress Sherelle Skeet, and it's directed by the wonderful director Lynette Linton, who recently, her work was on the West End in Shifters and in Barcelona with Lily Collins, so she's kind of, very much on the rise. I have never seen the play. Matt, I don't know if you've seen it before.
No, I think this is a real discovery.
Yeah, but it sort of follows this guy, Walter Holt. He's a tailor. He's got big ambitions to own his own shop and to become someone who makes suits rather than just alters them.
Yeah.
No more alterations is like one of his kind of main lines. And I think it's just a kind of satirical look at that kind of stereotype of West Indian upward mobility. I do know that when it premiered in the US, oddly enough, it got a slightly sniffy response from the New York Times, in fact. The reviewer felt it was a little amorphous. But this production seems to be a bit of an update. It's got additional material from the writer Trish Cook, whose parents are also part of the Windrush generation.
Yeah.
I think they hail from Dominica. So I'm just quite intrigued to see how it's been judged, actually.
Yeah, me too. I read that in reading ahead for today. I read that New York Times review. Amorphous. If only that could be something that would be the worst that would be levelled at all of us.
I know, it's true. But I think, Lynette Linton is a hugely talented director. It's a great cast. I'm just really pleased to see something like this coming, into town.
I'm really looking forward to seeing this, actually. It sounds great. It's at the National Theatre's Littleton space, and that kicks off on the 20th of February. Thanks, Nancy. Oliver, exclamation mark, can mean only one thing, Matt.
Yes. It means the classic Lionel Barton
There it
musical
comes.
is back.
Woohoo.
Consider it back on the West End. This is such an iconic title. I mean, certainly growing up in New York, which I did, Oliver was really the first British musical to go global. Well, global, certainly to crack the American market. And I remember listening to the cast album that my parents had and, the original production on Broadway and the revival, of course, the Oscar-winning film. And ever since I moved to London, it's sort of been around the West End in various productions overseen by Cameron Mackintosh, the legendary impresario, who has, he he's had a lifelong affection for and connection to this musical. He knew Lionel Bart very, very well. He was a stage manager, and he was, in fact, in a very early iteration of it, and then was stage managing. And his history with showbiz is intricately connected to this show. He's, of course, subsequently made a fortune with shows like Cat's Les Mis Phantom as a producer, but something keeps pulling him back to the source with this one. And what's interesting this time round, very often the selling point with Oliver is the actor playing Fagin, and over the years we've had Robert Lindsay and Jonathan Pryce and Rowan Atkinson and Jim Dale and so on. And so it's kind of a star vehicle. But this time around, the title is the star. I think the emphasis is, everyone knows the title. The production was done at Chichester last summer, and here it is at the Gielgud Theatre. Now, that is in no way to minimize the talent involved, because the Fagin who has been cast is a wonderful performer, Simon Lipkin, who's been in shows like Avenue Q and Assassins, and he's absolutely great. But with the greatest respect to him, I don't think people are booking to see him as Fagin, although they will go because of the show and hopefully come away loving what he's done. Nancy, the great female lead in the show, Georgia Brown's fantastic role way back when, songs like Papa and As Long As He Needs Me and so on, is Cameron McIntosh likes to kind of discover people. And he found this actress, Shanae Holmes, in a production of Miss Saigon, a title that Cameron produced originally on the West End, directed by Nick Heitner. And Shanae Holmes was Ellen in that production, and he thought she was really great. And so he's cast her as Nancy. So how will this production, directed and choreographed by Matthew Bourne, how will this be different from earlier versions? Oliver's interesting because you can play it dark, you can play it light, you can play it frivolously, you can play it sort of sadistically, because Fagin, the pickpocket character who Simon Lipkin is playing, is a character who can be taken any number of ways. And the question with Oliver is, how much reality does it really bear? Because it isn't, it's not an exercise in documentary verisimilitude. It's essentially a family entertainment. So you've got to kind of toe that line. And I'm really curious to see how this production manages it.
Well, it'll be super light on its feet with Matthew Bourne, won't it? I mean, it'll be very poetic and imaginative and
fleet of foot.
Yeah, but it's also interesting to know what Nancy Durrant's parents' favourite musical clearly is.
Now we know.
I wanted, as I've got two great brains in the room, I wanted to ask, reading around this, I read a piece by Neil Tennant talking about Oliver, and it was written back in 2011, and he was talking about how the songs in Oliver were brilliant pop songs in the 1960s that were listened to similar in the same room as the Kinks and the Beatles, etc., and how there's a great dearth of music in musicals that is actually pop music, is actually considered to be pop music. It's just considered music in musicals, right? It's a different thing. What do either or both of you think of that, if anything? Because I thought it was a fascinating thing for him to notice.
It's true. I mean, one of the things that's happened in musicals over the years is that the music in musicals is becoming increasingly ghettoized. They haven't crossed over into the pop arena. I mean, the hope is when you have people like Elton John doing shows like Tammy Faye and The Devil Wears Prada, because he comes obviously from the pop world and then he's moving to the musical world, that he'll be able to bridge that gap. But I don't think Devil Wears Prada is going to bridge anything, frankly. Jesus, no. That was pretty awful. So, yeah, I mean...
Devil Wears Primark. Yeah. Say our two critics.
But I also think that, the thing about songs in musicals is that they are required to continue and shed light on a narrative.
Yeah.
And so, and I was writing a piece about this, about pop stars writing for musicals, actually, recently, and I talked to Jake Shears, and he was saying that, his pop music can be quite narrative, and now he's finding himself writing more narrative into his pop music, having written songs for musicals. But they are a different thing. You are telling a story, and actually people don't generally do, in pop music sometimes it's just, you're just rhyming words because you like the sound of it. And that's what he said, not me. But I think it is a different thing. And if you start kind of doing maybe Nick Cave, Nick Cave and Kylie Minogue. You remember that song, something about somebody being murdered under a tree? Yes, that one. Yeah. That's sort of closer to it, but you don't get it very often.
No, right. Okay, so the fault might be on the boot might be on the other foot, that pop music isn't up to the narrative standards of theatre or musical.
Well, even when somebody like Cyndi Lauper, whose score for Kinky Boots I really loved, it's a great, I think, cast album and worth listening to. But I don't think any of the songs from that have really become takeaways, that kind of stand on their own. But they're perfect within the context of the show.
Well, thank you for answering my piqued interest. That is Oliver. And it's on now, and it closes on the 28th of September. Plenty of time to get to that. Nancy, for this, in the script, I've just written the note, wow.
Yeah.
And it is Manhunt on at the Royal Court Theatre.
Yeah.
Who is it about? And what was your initial reaction to seeing the title?
So I have no idea what to think about this, right? This is a play, Manhunt. It's at the Royal Court Theatre downstairs. It has been written by Robert Icke, who we were talking about earlier. It's his Royal Court debut, and it is about, of all things, the manhunt for Raoul Moat, right? And
So for our international listeners.
Yeah, sure. So for those listeners who have forgotten who that is or don't have a clue, Raoul Moat was a British man. He was from Newcastle with several not particularly defining jobs. He was a panel beater. He was a tree surgeon and a bouncer. These are things that I have recently rediscovered because I had forgotten all about this. He was released from prison and he went on a violent rampage. He injured his former partner. He killed her partner. He severely injured a police officer, and then it sort of escalated into this 6-day manhunt that ended with a very long standoff. It was one of the biggest manhunts on British soil. There were about 160 armed police officers involved, which at the time was about 10% of all the forces of England and Wales combined. Yeah. And over the course of the week, there was lots of reporting, lots of stuff came out about his family life. He threatened to kill a member of the public every time something inaccurate was reported. There was talk of hostages. It was insane. And then, and then, don't worry, I'm not going to miss this out. It got completely surreal when the former footballer Paul Gascoigne appeared at the siege and offered to bring him fried chicken and beer. It was completely mad. And then Moat shot himself and the whole thing stopped. And that was it. And I sort of feel like people have kind of forgotten about it now. But of course it had far-reaching consequences for the people involved. I don't know why it's happening now, but I have to see it. It is absolutely wild. And I mean, I don't know. I mean, we talked earlier about Robert Icke being, you know, a brilliant writer. He's only really shown himself in a way to be an adapter, but his adaptations are so radical that actually they feel like completely original works in themselves. And to be honest, this isn't a huge departure. It's basically telling that story but using as its source material a vast number of news reports. Mm-hmm. So it's basically the same thing. There's no reason to expect that it shouldn't be as exquisitely woven as anything he's ever done. But it's bonkers. I mean, it's completely insane.
It's kind of an amazing role for someone.
Crazy good.
Let's see who they cast.
It's a great role.
That'll be a juicy part.
Yeah, that will be a great part. And it's real. And you know, do you try to garner any sympathy for this man?
Is he a misunderstood?
Well, exactly, because because he had a very difficult childhood. There are reasons, no excuses, but reasons for all of the things that happened in this.
Yeah, I think
his
mum was bipolar and was often
there was
in hospital.
There was a lot going on. And so you're like, well, it's going to be a really tricky one, I think, but I cannot wait to see it.
Maybe he just never recovered from the great 1998 panel beating crisis.
I don't even know what a panel beater is.
They fix your car, don't they?
Do they? Is that what they do?
Yeah.
I don't know. I've never owned a car.
I'm enlisting services one at the moment.
No.
American listeners are now quickly Googling.
Be careful how you search, kids, for things like that.
Yeah, indeed.
That's Manhunt, which has already given us a thrill. And that starts on the 28th of March at the Royal Court Theatre's Jerwood space. Thank you very much, Nancy.
Thank you.
Matt, we're going to close with double helping of Tamsin Greig on the West End stage. Where are you going to start?
Well, when I first moved to London several millennia ago, one of the great things about being a playgoer here, which you never really had in New York, was at places like the National Theatre, because they really did have genuine repertory then, you could see people like Simon Russell Beale, for instance, in several shows at once, or Ralph Fiennes in his infancy as a theatre actor, and it was great. And that doesn't really happen much anymore. Somebody does something like Jonathan Bailey was Cassio for Nicholas Hytner many years ago, and then he becomes a movie star star, and then now he comes back many years later. But what's great is that Tamsin Greig, of course, is known for screen work, small and large, but she's such a brilliant theatre actor. She's one of these people I rush to see on stage. I just love her. And what I think is terrific here is that she's lending her talents to, on the one hand, a brand new play at the Donmar, written and directed by Anna Mackman, called Backstroke, co-starring Celia Imrie. Again, brand new, so I don't know anything more than what is in the press release. It's an intergenerational family drama about 3 generations of women. Celia Imrie, the grandmother, Tamsin Greig, the mother, and then there's
two
a
actors
daughter.
that make great choices,
yes.
presumably, though, with things they do.
So she's throwing her arm with something new, which is great, because there are a lot of actors who are scared of the new because they don't know if it's going to be good or not. If you do a classic, at least you know that the work is good, and the question is, can you fulfill it? With a new play, you don't really know what you have. But anyway, she's going directly from Backstroke to a revival of one of my sort of desert island plays, which is Terence Rattigan's very bruising and heartfelt play, The Deep Blue Sea, playing a character, Hester Collier, who at the beginning of the play is pretty much suicidal, and then she has to work her way back from the brink. And this is a production that was seen in Bath, and now it's coming to the West End with Finbar Lynch. Rachel Weisz did this role on screen. Penelope Keith has done it on stage. It's one of the kind of defining roles for women, and I just think it's great that Tamsin Greig wants to do theatre not once but twice, to do a contemporary play, a classic play. I really applaud that commitment to theatre when she doesn't have to be doing it at all, you know.
Yeah.
So I think it's wonderful. I'm really looking forward to them.
And it is a wonderful play. Terence Rattigan is always, since his pomp, is always on the fringes of being back in fashion, it seems to me. What about this particular one?
The thing about Rattigan, I mean, people say, oh, yes, it's all very upholstered and a bit stiff upper lip and all that. And I suppose, yes, because that's the climate against which he was writing. But actually, if you unstiffen that upper lip, there's so much pain and grief and sorrow that it is, dare I say, almost Sophoclean. I mean, it is pretty raw. And I'm curious to see how that's transmitted.
I'm feeling quite well upholstered this time of year,
good.
Sadly, and my lip is never.
That's the Christmas season for
yes,
you, Rob.
Exactly. So I feel I'm just anyone listening to this, I'll happily come and engage with your Rattigan. It's going to be fine.
That's good of you.
Like they're going to be queuing up. The Deep Blue Sea with the aforementioned brilliant Tamsin Greig is on at the Theatre Royal Haymarket, and that kicks off on the 7th of May. Backstroke, new with Celia Imrie and Tamsin Greig, is kicking off on the 14th of February. Maybe it'll be that romantic too. Nancy, Matt, it's so wonderful to have your brains, your wit and wisdom on the programme. It's always wonderful to kick us off into the new year and get people booking tickets and getting excited and all the rest of it. So thank you very much for both of your choices.
Thank you for having us.
And Monocle on Culture is produced by Sophie Monaghan-Coombs and Steph Chungu, and Steph also edits the show. Many thanks to Maisie Ringer for her research help on today's programme. We'll be back at the same time next week, but until then, from me, Robert Bounds, thank you for tuning in.